Obviously, the biggest news that's happened all week thus far has been the Epstein files drop from last Friday. Yesterday, we did an entire podcast talking about it, and you can watch those videos on YouTube or go back on the website to watch that full thing. The most important one, I would argue, was this video. Firaz is part of the segment where he was talking about Epstein as a political nexus. He was a political meeting point between all sorts of different factions. He was the fixer, he was a power broker, connecting people both for their agendas and to further the agenda that he held, along with his backers. Who his backers were, we can't be entirely certain of, but we do have a pretty good idea, not just from this most recent drop, but also from all of the other information that we had over the past 7 years since his death in the first place. So if you want to familiarize yourself with some of the really juicy stuff and not just the sensationalism, then watch that video. But there are interesting questions that come off of the back of it, and some interesting ways that both the mainstream and online influencers are all trying to downplay the revelations and what's going on with Epstein and the importance of it. Now, of course, it's far too late to actually do a successful cover-up at this point. But what people can try to do is sweep it under the rug and make it so that it's not as big a deal as it otherwise could be, and make it so people forget. If you can't cover it up in the first place, make it so that people forget. Sweep it over with the next news story, or make it so that in some cases, some very, very bizarre cases, some people are trying to rewrite the narrative and say that Epstein was actually cool.
Tough sell.
Very tough sell, but I'll get on to that when we get to it. First things first, though, the mainstream response to it, one of the most important questions that we need to be asking is, after all of the information that has been released, all of the people who knew Epstein, who were in constant contact with Epstein during and after his initial conviction and prison time for the sexual abuse of a 14-year-old girl back in 2008. Why is nobody being prosecuted over this? Why is nobody being arrested? And that's not just in terms of the sensationalist stuff where, you know, there were abuse of young girls and whatnot, but there's also the questions of financial fraud, the questions of conspiracy, market manipulation, misuse of state assets in the case of somebody like Peter Mandelson, where allegedly, according to the files, what it looks like is that he was updating Epstein on what was going to be happening with the selling off of British state assets so that Epstein could get in there, also that some of his accomplices and friends could get in there as well. There are all manner of crimes which can be alleged as a result of the Epstein files, and so far nobody has been arrested or prosecuted.
There's something interesting to say here, in that you'd think if you are, say, a competing elite, and there are people who've been implicated here, if you take them down, you can take resources from them, basically, and once you rise to a certain level, it sort of becomes a zero-sum game of, you know, you've got to take things from other people to get the biggest gains. And so there's a strong incentive there to, you know, take these people out and compete, and yet they haven't, which seems to suggest that perhaps there's a reason behind that, because ordinarily you see elite types, you know, they're not always pally with one another. Sometimes they do actually try and screw each other over for financial gain, which actually happens all the time. And you'd think that would be going on quite a lot, especially with an opportunity like this. You can destroy someone's career forever, and it's just not happening, which, to my mind, if rich, greedy people aren't going for a big pile of money, there's something going on here.
If they're not clawing at each other's throats for power, why is that?
Mm.
Well, the reason that we have right now is that the release of the Epstein files was forced by a bill that was put through by Thomas Massie in collaboration with some Democrats near the end of last year, and that was as a result of the House Oversight Committee that's been investigating all of this. Now, the House Oversight Committee has some powers to do things like subpoena the Clintons, which we'll get onto in a moment, but they do not have themselves any prosecutorial powers as such. If they wanted to be able to make any charges off the back of it, the FBI would have to be the ones reopening the Epstein case and charging people with the allegations that have come from all of this. So we'll see if that ends up actually happening, but it is in the FBI's hands, and it's up to them whether the Department of Justice and the FBI is actually going to do anything with all of that. Donald Trump is saying that basically now that they've released these files, the DOJ have done their job. So no further action needs to be taken from it, which is
strange.
An interesting response. On the subject of the Clintons, some of the other news that has come of this is that the Clintons, who had risked being put in contempt of Congress, being put up to a vote of contempt of Congress because they were refusing to answer their subpoena, which if that vote had gone through would have put them potentially at risk of prosecution, have now decided that they are going to give depositions as the contempt vote was about to come up tomorrow. I think it was supposed to be this Wednesday that vote was going to come up. And it says here, former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made a new offer on Monday to give depositions for a House committee's investigation of sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, just days ahead of an expected vote on contempt of Congress for the Democrat power couple. The Clintons' attorneys said that their clients would appear for depositions on mutually agreeable dates and asked that the House not move forward with contempt proceedings in a message sent to House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform Chairman James Comer.
So there's something to say here in that if I were accused and implicated in the Epstein files, the first thing I'd want to do would be to clear my name. And this is an opportunity for them to do that. And the fact that they're dragging their feet sort of suggests
some
people,
people, as mentioned in this article, are also already complaining that, hey, they're not setting a date yet. They've not given a clear indication of when this deposition date will be. So they might just be trying to buy themselves some time. Why weren't they forthcoming in the first place? And they had also put forward ideas for other interview types that they could do that would be a little bit more off the record. Under the deposition, if they wanted to not answer a question, they would have to plead the fifth. They would have to plead to their constitutional rights. The interviews that they were looking for, they'd have just been able to pick and choose which questions to answer or not in the first place. So I think that they've been pushed into a little bit of a corner by this contempt of Congress vote.
But I mean, pleading the fifth in the case of Bill Clinton would be pretty ironic, because he made a name out of many other things, but he was a good orator. You have to understand this, and you have to admit this, and he was good at when he was being pressured in interviews. He could come back to you.
Well, it depends on what
an answer. So
depends on what
if he goes, I plead the fifth. Yeah, that's
depends on the questions. Depends what answers they can give.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying that it would be very ironic to see that.
No, it certainly would. But here are some of the ways, now that we've got that out of the way, that the mainstream media is trying to divert attention from a lot of the very revelatory subjects that we covered, again, in this particular segment here, Epstein, the Political Nexus, that you should give a watch. It's 45 minutes almost, but there's a wealth of information there, and I think Firas puts it together quite well. One of the ways that the mainstream media, and other people have noted this as well, are trying to divert attention away from some of the more explosive stuff is by focusing purely on Prince Andrew, who was already a known quantity in this, who was already a big story as part of his association with Epstein and kind of like a sensationalist media headline, and Peter Mandelson, who is already disgraced. He was already basically disgraced. He had to resign from being the ambassador to the United States September of last year after all of the new revelations came out with the Epstein birthday book and the birthday card that had been signed for Epstein's 50th birthday. So they're focusing on people who are basically old news. Old news that can draw headlines rather than a lot of the new stuff.
Did still get lots of calls from various political parties asking to revoke his lordship in the House of Lords.
Of course. I'm not saying that this doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that this isn't an important piece of the pie, piece of the puzzle, I should say. But this is something that a lot of people are only focusing on in the mainstream. Small fish in a big pond, right? And the most embarrassing way that the mainstream media is trying to navigate this whole thing is to say, it's Putin, Epstein, we've read through the files, we've done the research, we've done the analysis, he was a Putin stooge, right?
Really?
Obviously, Robert Maxwell, KGB, no other intelligence service operations that he was ever involved in. Where was he buried? Who gave him a state funeral? Putin, obviously. Come on. Come on, there's over 1,000 mentions of Putin's name in the Epstein files. There's over 3,000 of Trump's and over 4,000 of Ehud Barak's, the former Israel Prime Minister. But Putin's where we're going to focus on here.
Harry, I think what happened is that there is an almost impossible to digest amount of information that has been released.
This is absolutely true.
I think it's about 6 million pages last time I checked.
I saw
and they released now 3.5.
Yeah.
But there were
figure, Harry.
Lots of other figures before, right? So it's an impossible to digest. It's an amount of information that is impossible to digest. So what was bound to happen with releasing that amount of information was that you would get 99% of discourse being propaganda. And that kind of propaganda would approach the issue with their basic assumptions. So what happens here, and these are all the attempts, as you're saying, to try to divert attention from all of the matter, which, I mean, it's, as I said, it's almost impossible to digest, is everyone is trying to pick their enemy.
No,
So right now you say mainstream media tries to say it's Putin, and they're trying to cast aspersions that it can only be Putin. Others are trying to say it's just the Saudis. Others say it's the Qataris. Others only the Israelis. Whatever. Personally, my view, we should never know, and we should never stop, and we should never ignore anything. But as you say before, we have Epstein in on some emails saying, for instance, I work for the Rothschilds. Now, you don't exactly, we have to see exactly in what capacity he was writing this, but this is, as you said, things are adding up. When you say also he was very much friend, it's not when you say, it's when, I mean, there are pages showing this. Was very much close to
Ehud
Barak.
There are now phone calls that people have found being released.
Personally, I'm not going to dismiss people talking about potential ties to other foreign.
Clearly, there were ties to Russia.
Yeah. I'm not going to dismiss that out of hand, but I think that we should bear in mind that there is 99% of what is being called right now, what is being said about the issue right now is propaganda. We should focus on the files, and also we should be patient.
Well, no, I agree with you there. I mean, clearly there are actually ties to Putin. There are a number of people who've been putting together that it looked as though he might have been working alongside other intelligence agencies to try to work against Putin. Other people are saying, like the mainstream media are trying to say that he was trying to work with Putin. Now, obviously, I don't know the veracity of how these people have put it together, because one of the problems with it all being released at once, without any accompanying legal proceedings by the FBI, without major investigations, without much help for normal people to put it together, is it reminds me of the thing that the mainstream media spoke out about Steve Bannon for, that famous quote of his, flood the zone with shit. It comes across a little bit like that with all of these files being released all at once with not much help putting anything together. Is that most people are going to be overwhelmed by it. They're going to pick up on the one thing that catches their eye and that gets their attention, and they're going to hyper-focus on that where it might be multiple different avenues at once.
And really quickly, the most important thing is that it's this discourse is never going to end. That's why people will want to flood with propaganda the discourse. And it's not going to end, because all it takes for anyone who doesn't trust any particular narrative to do in order to speak against it is to say, well, there is something that wasn't published, that wasn't released.
I mean, there is still, there is 2.5 million, 3 million pages and material that are still yet to be released that we don't know what's in there. Perhaps there is some damning stuff in that information that would put everything together. But as such, as it is right now, just because there's a huge deluge of information that's going to overwhelm most people, doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a lot of very pertinent information that we can't take from this, and there isn't some patterns and connections that we can take from this. Again, yesterday in Firaz's segment, what we were discussing was that it looked like it was putting together the kind of the operating ways that these networks that work behind the scenes operate, that they often work on an ethnic basis, and somebody like Epstein can work as a middleman, connecting multiple people, and he did seem, in the way that he behaved with these other people, to have an aloof attitude where within this hierarchy, he at the very least saw himself as above people, even members of royal families across the world, and high-ranking political officers, for instance. Either way, again, just outright, just going like as Andrew Marr does here, just saying, oh, there's an ominous backstory here, just saying maybe he was a KGB agent. Maybe he was a CIA agent, maybe he was an MI5 agent, maybe he was a Mossad agent. There is evidence for some of these things, but just coming out in the mainstream media going, this puts together everything that we already believed about Russian interference in Western politics, means that as far as I'm seeing it, they are cherry picking and trying to distract from a lot of the other stuff, especially the way that it kind of destroys left-right political paradigms, because mentioned Steve Bannon, towards the end of Epstein's life in 2017 and 2018, played a big part in Epstein's life. He was basically trying to redo his image. He was like an image coordinator and was being put together by Epstein with Noam Chomsky as well, and collaborating in meetings with these people. So you've got somebody who's considered by the mainstream to be on the far right of the political spectrum being connected up with somebody on the very far left of the political spectrum, but they're both working in the same interests and for the same people. So that kind of does suggest that this whole left-right political paradigm, the way that it works public-facing, is somewhat heavily manufactured.
I mean, we do have people from all areas of the spectrum who could be collaborating with Epstein and people of Epstein's circle. That personally, I don't think that this invalidates completely political categories, but it is certainly suggestive and heavily suggestive that there are people who are trying to finance, let's say, both sides. And that's not particularly weird to believe.
It's not weird to believe.
I mean, wasn't Lenin saying that the best way to control deal with opposition is to control it?
It's good to control all sides at all times if you want to operate from the shadows and get what you want. But it's just confirmation. It's just confirmation of that, which is great. One of the other weird things is, for instance, Lad Bible and other people talking about how he was banned from Xbox Live, and I've seen some people trying to argue off of the back of this that now this means that Epstein was a elite gamer just like the rest of us, and that he's kind of cool. You would have been fighting against Jeffrey Epstein in Modern Warfare 2 lobbies back in 2009. Isn't that cool? No. What a ridiculous argument to make. The most damning one, again, is Donald Trump. Again, he has mishandled these from the very start of his administration. First of all, having his DOJ big them up as, and like Pam Bondi, big them up as this huge drop that was going to spill the secrets on everything, and then backtracking a few months later and saying, no, the whole thing is a hoax, and then flip-flopping over and over and over again, when in every interview where he's been asked about this, he's been very reticent, very hesitant to come forward about it. He's tried to downplay it and push aside, oh, are you still talking about that guy? I had nothing to do with him. Now he's also trying to say, even though they have just released all of this information, now he's trying to say, oh, this is just about the Democrats. They said it was all about me, but it's actually all about the Democrats. Even though, as I just mentioned, people like Steve Bannon are heavily involved in it. There's a lot of correspondence with Peter Thiel, Ehud Barak, and Jeff Epstein was speaking a lot about getting involved with Palantir and a lot of the AI development that was going on as well. So you can't, again, just put it down to being purely about Democrats, even though, yes, there are plenty of Democrats mentioned in there, including the Clintons.
I want to say something, because I know both of us are critical of Trump, but I want to say on this that he has made some mistakes, but I think he was, and in this case it was Thomas Massie who was pushing it, but I think that at least Trump did try to push for these files being released. Now, whether he did it in a good way or not is a question, but I think that to an extent he did try to did try to.
Well, I mean, we can't deny it. I mean, under his
Also,
administration.
one thing to note also is
they're
because
out.
Epstein talks a lot about Palantir and Peter Thiel, and Peter Thiel also has lots of ties to Vance, which I think this is going to be really bad for Vance in the days to come in the Republicans.
I agree, but yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you've got to say the files have come out under Trump.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, but the way that it has been handled has done nothing but make Trump look bad, and it's given people a lot of reason to suspect Trump because of the way that he handled it. But now here's where we move more from the mainstream to the kind of like online influencer takes that have been coming out about this. And this is important because a lot of people, when it comes to watching stuff online, like us, get a lot of their information filtered to them through particular online take sellers, where they are trying to get you to agree with their version of events, and they want to filter everything through their lens, right? So what are the different ways in which different factions online are trying to filter the Epstein files to their own audiences, all of whom seem to have the goal of getting you to ignore them, forget about them, who cares? But ultimately, they're all coming at it from a different angle. So what are the different angles that are coming out here? So first, you've got a lot of these more mainstream figures, these kind of like, what would you say, dissident light figures, people like Matt Taibbi, who is involved in the Twitter files drop alongside that woman who runs CBS News now.
I can't remember who
you know who I'm on about, though. These people who were involved in the Twitter files drops.
They're like non-woke leftists.
Yeah, kind of. You'd say
maybe
that.
Towards the center.
Yeah.
That area of the spectrum.
And people like Claire Leman, or however you pronounce her name, going just like, am I the only one who finds the Epstein story incredibly boring? Matt Taibbi popping up going like, no, I find it boring as well. You know, just like this massive drop of documents that seems to confirm a lot of information and suspicions that people had about this enormous behind-the-scenes global conspiracy to screw you over, all involving degenerate sexual predators and perverts as well. That's just boring. That's just an average Saturday for Matt Taibbi.
It's
allegedly
the kind of thing that would make a compelling plot for a film that you know, it's pretty much what Eyes Wide Shut is, isn't it? This weird elitist cult that,
yeah.
Although in Stanley Kubrick's film, they weren't underage girls. So at least Kubrick had the decency to do that. But yeah, I don't understand who in their right mind can find the story boring. What is wrong with you? Like, to say this, you're obviously carrying water for people. It's ridiculous.
And then there's
that's a part of the discourse of lots of MAGA people right now. They're trying to say it doesn't matter.
Well, speaking about the MAGA guys, right? Okay, then you get onto these people like Captive Dreamer, who was a big part of the 2024 online front for the Trump election. He was the guy who, I believe he was the first person to share the information from Springfield, Ohio, with eating the cats and dogs, where he managed to find the town council meetings or whatever they were, where the people were coming up and saying these Haitians have come into our town, and you know, cats and dogs are starting to go missing, and people went from there and thought, well, they're probably eating them in that case. Well, he has come out regarding this, saying asking people what specifically from the Epstein files is a game changer for them, and it becomes quite clear that none of this is important, and it's just catnip for retards brought out by scumbags like Thomas Massie to sow discord amongst low info voters. Please continue to seethe. And he carries on saying, like, what was the real stuff you found then? Oh, wait. Clicked on the wrong thing there, sorry. And then you can just go down and see that people are posting loads of stuff.
Yeah, there's loads of interesting things here. That also calling Thomas Massie a scumbag for what? Releasing the Epstein files
says a lot about you rather than him, doesn't it? But that's something a lot of these like MAGA influencers are trying to do, because obviously Donald Trump has come out against Thomas Massie. He wants to primary him, and as part of that, he's been trying to kind of argue that Thomas Massie is some kind of frothing anti-Semite, saying he hates Israel, yada yada yada. And a lot of people have come out insulting him with terms like third worldist. They're saying that he wants there to be open borders. He's anti-ICE. Somebody tagged me in Twitter a few weeks ago saying, like, oh, this is what Thomas Massey votes for. And it was him being the only Republican in the House voting against a bill that was being advertised as a pro-ICE bill. Now, unlike many who just look at the headlines, I actually, looked into it a little bit and saw that the bill, as you would expect, had a load of extra stuff in there for military-industrial complex spending, loads of excess spending, and actually, if you read the document, it had already been amended by Democrats to remove the capacity of 5,000 beds for ICE detainees. So even the pro-ICE bill was actually removing the capacity for ICE to detain more illegals, right? So there's again, low information kind of attitude from some people. Donald Trump has said, sick Thomas Massey. So they go against Thomas Massey. And people will do that. And Captive Dreamer is one of the guys doing this because he's literally posted this. Thomas Massey would get a ton of votes from people not in America who have funny Star Wars names and hate the USA. Then he just says, Thomas Massey sexually abuses kids. Release the Massey files.
Libelous, isn't it?
Yeah, just keep seething, bro. Just keep seething. Like, this is all because this is seen by the mainstream and by many people as some kind of massive L for the Trump administration to have released these in the first place, and they see Thomas Massey as an enemy to MAGA and to Trump.
Well, to be fair, if the Trump administration hadn't dragged their feet in the first place,
this wouldn't have been an issue.
No, in fact, it would have been a positive because they said, we're going to release these files, here you go. And like, yeah, we've lived up to our word.
But one of the other things about the whole game changer aspect of it is trying to say that everything in this needs to be absolutely brand new information for it to matter in the first place, which is not true. But secondly, there is information that does expand our understanding of what was going on. One of them that has been remarked on was the prevalence of Epstein and many of his associates referring to, let's be frank here, non-Jewish people as goyim, which is an insulting slur term for non-Jewish people. Not just white people, just anybody who is non-Jewish. Gentile people. There's Gentile, which is the polite way of saying it. Goyim, which is the slur way of saying it. And the thing that suggests is that people like Epstein and some of those working alongside of him had a racially supremacist mindset, which probably motivated the things that they were doing and motivated and was partially part of the reason why you could assume that they were allegedly abusing non-Jewish girls.
I was thinking about this when I was reading through the files, and one of the things I did think of is, well, hang on a minute, out of all of the victims that we know about at the very least, I can't think of a single one that is Jewish. So it seems to suggest, similar in some ways to the Pakistani gangs in Britain, it had an ethno-religious aspect to it.
And of course, I need to preface again, like I did yesterday, by saying that is not reflective of all people of that ethnic and of that religious background. This is just these people. Assuming that all Jews think and behave in this way would be the same as assuming that all white people behave the same way that a white supremacist would. But it is interesting that it does seem to motivate these people.
I'll say something which may be a bit weird, but I honestly, this just didn't surprise me at all. Just that a person who is a confirmed monster would just be racist. Just it's not particularly weird.
No, it's not that surprising.
It's not surprising.
It was a confirmation of what many people suspected, and again, it was also just strange how casual it was. Just how it was.
Well, it's almost always casual.
It's not anything that they reflected on. Either way, so that's Captive Dreamer. Amongst it as well, you get MAGA influencers like Patrick Casey trying to say, you see the Epstein files, bro. He was eating babies on a boat. George H.W. Bush abused a guy, passed the bong, trying to skirt it into the realm of pure conspiracy thinking, right? And absurd Candace Owens style conspiracy thinking. And there are plenty of people doing that, but you shouldn't let that distract you from the fact that there are lots of important new information or confirmed information that we're getting from this. You've got other people trying to make it seem low status and low IQ by starting to call it Epstein slop. Ironically, these same sort of people who just 4 or 5 years ago were saying that all of the Epstein stuff was real and that nothing was ever going to happen. Almost as though, like, maybe these guys are willing to change their opinions depending on who's in administration, whether it benefits Trump or not. Should you trust these people with their views if they're going to flip like this so easily?
And the next guy. And it won't stop with the MAGA bandwagon. It's going to happen again and again and again.
Yeah, and speaking of people who flip-flop on a lot of things, we get to Nick Fuentes, who after his massive mainstream push and big, tidying up his image since the middle of last year, decided to torpedo the entire thing with takes like this. Can you hear it? We can't hear it. Samson, can the audience hear it? I can't hear you, Samson. The sound is broken again. Either way, Fuentes decided to come out in not necessarily defense, but sort of carrying water for the whole affair by coming out with brave and shocking contrarian takes like Epstein wasn't really a paedophile. And that all of the focus on stuff like the sexual abuse angle of this is just hysterical, womanizing headline attention distractions from the actual story, which is all of the political stuff going on behind the scenes. Then going on multiple 20-minute long diatribes, speeches that he's giving about how the only reason that people care if a 14-year-old girl is groomed and abused in this way is because we have been feminized and the age of consent is questionable. These are the sorts of takes that he's been coming out with. An amazing fall from grace to take after multiple people in the mainstream and even people on this podcast, and I don't exclude myself from that, were becoming very positive towards him towards the end of last year, or at the very least were starting to listen to the things that he had to say. An amazing thing to do, to just drop all of that goodwill that he'd built up. Yeah, of course, you were always very skeptical.
Who called the grift?
Yeah. You were always very skeptical of him. He then this is following up when he just said, "Go ahead, cancel me. Jeffrey Epstein was cool as F." Again, because people weren't agreeing with him 100% that the actual important thing with this was the political conspiracy and the fact that there was blackmail being used to blackmail the president, potentially, governments across the world. Because people weren't agreeing with him that that's the only thing to focus on, and people were also saying it is also really bad that he was abusing girls, he decided to just go full contrarian and say, Jeffrey Epstein was cool as F, I'm the villain now.
Guys, okay. This is the problem with the bulk of your content being edgy jokes, because you constantly say plausible deniability. You won't have the way to back up serious discourse. And in fact, you told me this morning that almost all of his takes about geopolitics come from someone else. You don't have to say who, but it's sort of like this. It's too many edgy jokes make one a buffoon unless one's a comedian. Because if your founding act is just talking to shit posters and people who want edginess for edginess' sake, game over. At some point, you're going to make a mistake. If transgression is what you're selling, at some point, you're like a leftist who just want to revolutionize things.
Yeah. And his groypers have decided to go all in on this, saying that Jeffrey Epstein has aura, using these old videos, when in fact all you need to do to cancel that out is to watch some of the new videos that have been released of him as part of this, including his interview with Steve Bannon, where he just comes across like this really nerdy, kind of unintelligent guy from Brooklyn who speaks like this. There's no aura. Not that would matter in the first place.
Also, there's another crime there.
He also thought that
Plato and Aristotle did write.
Yeah, he said, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle never wrote anything. That's just wrong. Like, it's one of the worst and most absurd things about the Epstein files drop is all of these important politicians across the world they were like begging for audiences with him, like he was some kind of wise sage. And he was able to get one over with mid-wit wrong takes like this. We're ruled by morons because they were impressed by a guy just saying, did you know that Plato and Aristotle never wrote anything? They literally did, you idiot. I'm glad you're dead for this take alone.
Or is he?
Maybe. Who knows? And it's forced me into a position of agreeing with bloody Jake Shields. When people say, I'm tired of pretending you didn't have aura, and Jake Shields has to be the voice of reason, saying, bro, this, like, he was an awful person. Like, why are you trying to do this just because Nick Fuentes has told you he's cool now and started trying to sell merch based on clothes that he wore? Like, that's absurd. And then flip-flopping again, as soon as these files drop, Fuentes comes out saying the Department of Justice should reopen the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and his associates in light of the file dump. It's not enough for the public to see another random tranche of files. The DOJ has an obligation to follow up on all of it. Transparency and accountability. Now, actually, this is right. This is right, and I agree with this. This is a correct take. It's a very easy correct take to fall into. But did it need a month of Epstein's cool, he's my hero, actually, leading up to this? Or does it actually discredit
character's
him
destiny
in the future? And I thought that Morgoth summed the whole thing up with the way that it's being talked about by saying the smart way to handle the Epstein files was to prattle about aura, irony, and to minimize the seriousness of the implications, which is what is trying to happen. All of this is in service of minimizing the story and minimizing the implications and minimizing the chance of there being a real investigation at the end of it, because all of these people are trying to control public opinion and make it so that public opinion does not push for further investigation and prosecution off of the back of this, where at the very least this needs to be followed up on. We deserve the truth. We deserve to see people go down for this. Maybe the Clintons can be the first domino in that, but we will have to see. Do not let these people try to confuse you with all of their strange, absurd, and bizarre takes on the matter.